Welcome to this episode of On Record PR. It is Monday, March 2nd, 2026. You are here with your hosts, Jennifer Simpson Carr and Gina Rubel.
Hi,
Good morning.
everyone. Hi, Jen.
So, Gina, before we dive into our conversation today, I know we both think it's important to acknowledge the broader moment that we are in the world. We're recording this at a time of significant instability globally, particularly in the Middle East. We know that tensions are escalating, intelligence operations are intensifying, and the stakes right now are very real. And as we were preparing for this episode this morning and doing some last minute research just to make sure in real time we were kind of up to the minute in what's going on, we saw a great article by Lisa Schuchman, the
Schumann.
editor. Schumann, sorry,
Yeah,
excuse me. Lisa
that's okay.
Schumann, editor for Law.com International, and she published an article just about an hour ago on how Big Law's Middle East offices are on high alert right now.
Yeah, it's Jennifer. We can't have any conversations today without acknowledging the geopolitical climate and the financial climate that we're in, both here in the United States and globally. There's going to be a lot of fallout. The administration has already talked about weeks. Who knows if it'll be months or years? We just don't know. But I do, and I know you want to, and on behalf of Furia Rubel, just say that anyone with family in any of the regions affected, anyone with family or friends, and friends, of course, who have to fight, we just want to say that we're thinking about you. We're sending out our heartfelt thoughts and prayers, and it's a tough time. It's a Monday morning, and the world went a little crazy over the weekend, or a lot crazy, as you will. But we do have a topic, and Jen, as you know, I had a big weekend. I'm a little exhausted.
Yeah, you were celebrating mom's birthday.
Yes, it was my mother's 80th, and we surprised her. We had a reunion with her cousin who she hasn't seen in over 30 years. And that was a surprise. And then we had a surprise party. And so I could hear it in my voice. My voice is a little bit raspy. I probably, if anybody watches the video, is going to go, oh, she looks tired. I'm okay. I'm just very exhausted. So I'm drinking my coffee as we have this conversation. But again, I appreciate you, Jen, helping to prepare everything for these podcasts every week religiously, or every other week religiously now, since we went to an every other week schedule. But also, my thoughts are with everyone who is affected by what's happening in the world right now.
So, you and I spent some time together last week in Stamford, Connecticut at the CCBJ Women in Business and Law Conference. CCBJ, for those listeners who may not know, is Corporate Counsel Business Journal, owned and operated by our friend Kristen Calv. And
And I think they pronounce it Calvi.
Calvi.
I
Okay.
think
Sorry,
that's
Kristen.
Hi, Kristen.
So I will say the energy in the room. So first of all, the room was senior women leaders, board members, managing partners, office managing partners, in-house counsel, operations. I mean, it was really just this strong group of women, and it was energetic. It was a great opportunity to talk about what's happening in real time in our lives in the positions that we hold. And what really struck me was how forward-looking the discussions were. They were not theoretical. They were really about responsibility, power in their positions, power as leaders, and institutional integrity. So really practically very deep and really about our responsibility as leaders in the roles that we hold.
And Jennifer, we'd be remiss if we didn't say that for those who were able to get there in the midst of a blizzard, it was fantastic. And I can only imagine for the people who got stuck because of the northeastern blizzard that we dealt with last week. I hope we're able to share some good insights from it, because it was a phenomenal event. And I know that not only Kristen, but all the team at CCBJ put their hearts and souls into this. And I had the pleasure of moderating a panel called The Guardians of the Rule of Law. And it was with Leander Dolphin, who's the managing partner of Shipman and Goodwin, Arlene Fickler, who's of counsel at Dilworth Paxson in Philadelphia. And not only is she a practicing attorney, but she also serves on the board of, it's called Cyril, the the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law out of University of Pennsylvania. And I've learned so much from her in the short time that I've gotten to know her. And also, unfortunately, Latanya Langley, who's the chief legal officer and corporate secretary at Edgewell Personal Care, was unable to join us because of the blizzard. She just wasn't able to get there, but she provided tons of insights, and I was able to share some of them because we spent so much time preparing for this panel. And I kept thinking that these conversations really, like, as you said earlier, Jennifer, they're not abstract. They're about what leaders are actually doing when the pressure is on and when decisions aren't obvious. And the consequences, it leaves me a little exhausted. I am already exhausted. It leaves me more exhausted. The consequences are so real as to what's happening, right down to whether or not a law firm, and we can go as far as big law, is going to survive what's happening in the world.
Yes. And it's interesting because now it still feels real time. I mean, almost immediately after the conference, the Anthropic story broke. And it felt like a real case study in exactly what you, Leanda, Arlene, and Latanya, you had prepared and spoke about. So, just very briefly for our listeners, Anthropic is the AI company behind Claude. We will drop links in the show notes so that you can read more, but they publicly pushed back on the US Department of Defense last week. A lot has transpired over the weekend, but the dispute centers around contract language that would allow, quote, any lawful use, end quote, of its AI systems. Anthropic is saying that even if it's lawful, we're not comfortable with potential uses involving mass domestic surveillance or fully automated weapons. They're essentially drawing a values-based boundary. The Pentagon's response escalated, threats about removing Anthropic from the supply chain, invoking the Defense Production Act, political criticism. And all of this is very fascinating. And we were talking about this internally because it essentially started as contract language. And then within days, it became public blog posts, media headlines, geopolitical positioning. It's such a clear illustration that these decisions don't stay in the conference room. You and I have talked about on the shows before. Governance questions become brand questions, and legal questions become political questions.
And Jen, that's exactly what we talked about on the rule of law panel. It's about independent judgment under pressure. And it's about making tough decisions. The rule of law depends on people willing to say, we won't do this, even if and when they can. And we saw that with the executive orders in 2025, with the firms that have been fighting the administration. We saw many, and we use the term capitulate in the industry. We've seen one where the managing partner has now been implicated in the Epstein spot files. There's a lot happening in the world. And frankly, even that's exhausting. I better not use that word too much anymore today. But it goes back to that independent judgment and alignment.
So let's talk about the bigger takeaway, because while Anthropic is one example or case study, it really, this conversation isn't about that situation. It's about values-based positioning as a competitive strategy.
That's the shift. For a long time, companies and law firms can rely on, we comply with the law, and that's the safe answer. But that's no longer enough. We live in this pure chaos environment of 24/7, 365, instantaneous communication. And I go back to Jennifer. When I first started to practice law, email was new. Think about that. Email was new. Google was this new thing. The internet was, it was new to us. It was new. We had new access to it. Now everything is so much faster, and it's fascinating because people ask, and I think it was the keynote there saying, with the use of all these tools and what's happening and the speed with which we do things, are you actually getting time back? Like, no. The decisions have to come faster. The risks are higher. There's no time to breathe. So clients, talent, regulators, everyone is watching how organizations show up around AI. And that has to do with privacy, surveillance, and national security. It has to do with your own personal security. I remember when I used to travel to England, people would say, oh, well, they have cameras at every stoplight and they know where you're going from point A to point B. Do they think it's any different here in the US? I mean, it's not. And so things have changed, and silence can read as alignment when you choose not to show up. But that doesn't mean, and I said this at the conference, sometimes silence is your best defense, especially what we like to call the power of pause, just taking a deep breath. But the power of pause is much shorter today than it ever was. And so articulating those boundaries is important, because if you don't, people will assume that you don't have any. And for law firms, especially, if you're advising on AI, if you're using AI, if you're advising on defense, privacy, national security, you have to be clear internally about where your firm's lines are. Where do you draw the line and why? And oftentimes we confuse ethics with morality and culture. And we have to be mindful that your culture matters, because that's what talent and client retention and acquisition isn't just about skill and ability anymore. And your culture now matters more than ever. So it's uncomfortable, bottom line, because firms are businesses. Law firms are businesses, more so today than ever. There's revenue involved. There's egos involved. There are client relationships involved, and there's humans involved. And that's really what we can't forget. We are saying that values clarity can actually be a differentiator and can attract certain clients. It can attract certain talent, and it signals leadership of every client, of every recruiter, of every strategic partner. And it makes a difference to your firm's long-term reputation. It ties directly to the conference theme, which was visibility and voice. It's not about optics. Before, you used to be able to get away with optics. It's about standing for something when it matters.
Yeah, that's all a very good summary of why being clear is so important. And I think the other big takeaway here, and again, we've talked about this previously in other episodes, is that AI governance is no longer just compliance. It's board level, it's crisis communications. We've had these conversations. It's not adding a tool to your toolkit. It is really high level boardroom conversation about the use, about the culture, about leadership.
And we're not just talking about nonprofit boards, which are extremely valuable and important. We're talking about paid boards. We're talking about corporate boards, where it's about looking at how quickly these things escalate, from contract negotiations to public blog posts, political attacks, war, national headlines. And if you're advising clients in this space, you can't just give a memo about regulatory exposure. You need to think about investor calls, employee reaction, media timing. You need to think about human lives. Right now, what we need to be thinking about human lives. We need to be thinking about the cost to our businesses. As you said, Jennifer, earlier, Lisa wrote that article about firms with offices in the Middle East. They, on Friday, started implementing, and probably before that, because we had a sense that this could be coming, but they had to be prepared to deal with this. How do we keep our people safe? How do we keep our clients safe? They were implementing, smart law firms anyway, were implementing their crisis response plans early last week because we knew it was coming. We just didn't know when. And boards are asking those questions. Where are the guardrails? What are our ethical frameworks? What's happening that ends up on the front page? And I'm talking about the big boards, the boards of your publicly traded companies. And the conference had that excellent session about board readiness. It was so good. Capital allocations, metrics, fiduciary duty. I'd argue AI in particular, that risk now sits squarely inside that conversation. And they talked about that. It's AI strategy isn't innovation alone. It's risk management, it's brand management, it's institutional trust, and law firms can integrate regulatory advice with crisis strategy, and they should be if they're not. And those governance insights that go along with it are going to be far more valuable than firms operating in silos. And that's really a bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And we talked just before we hit record, we were talking just very briefly about different distinctions. But for me, one of the most important themes that kind of came out of these discussions and our chat this morning was the difference between lawful and acceptable.
So I'm glad you heard that way. I did too, but I didn't put it in my mind that way, probably because we went from that to coming back through snow to me going into this crazy weekend that I had. But that's the tension at the heart of this story and the scenarios we discussed on the panel. In this instance, and when I talk about this, I'm talking about Anthropic. The Pentagon's position is essentially these uses are lawful. But what Anthropic is saying is legality doesn't resolve the ethical or moral question. And so I try to be careful with the use of the word ethical, just so the listeners know, because among lawyers, it means something very specific, the ABA model rules of ethics. But most people who don't have a legal degree think about it more like morality. So I just want to bring that to bear. So we use it a little bit both ways here, but it's really about what is right and just for us. What are we bringing to the table? And we're seeing this everywhere. We're seeing it in tech every day. We see it in finance, in healthcare. Healthcare institutions are fighting back. No, we're not going to give you information about where someone was born, what their gender is. Why HIPAA started in the first place. And the biggest risk isn't always regulatory violation, it's public backlash. It's very real because reputational risk now moves faster than that litigation. And litigation never moved fast in the first place. And that's where that rule of law conversation came in, and it becomes really nuanced. It's not about rejecting legality. It's about recognizing that institutional legitimacy depends on more than compliance. And I really want to say that again. Institutional legitimacy depends more than compliance. Reputation matters, and perception is 9/10 of the rule. I can't say that enough. So the rule of right truth. I love that, Jen. Yeah, the rule of law isn't just statutes and policies. It's public confidence, and that's so important. And that confidence erodes when decisions feel technically legal but morally unexamined. Bottom line.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation. protecting brand and reputation and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
So the through line of the CCBJ conference really was leadership with integrity, visibility with responsibility, and power with accountability. And the
Jennifer, you hit the nail on the head there. That's fantastic. And that's exactly what it was.
The Anthropic situation is just one real-time example of what this looks like. Making a call that may cost revenue, that may invite criticism, but aligns with principles of a company. So for law firm leaders, we think the message is clear. AI governance isn't theoretical. Ethics isn't a panel topic. This is an operational reality. It's happening every day in big and small ways.
And the next time one of a law firm's clients face a moment like this, the question won't just be, is it legal? It will be, is it defensible? Is it aligned? And are we prepared for the consequences? That's leadership in this era. And to some respect, it always was, but now it's really front of the line. And that's the work that we're doing around the rule of law.
So Gina, thank you again for leading that panel. I did put little comments on LinkedIn to thank Leander and Arlene. And of course, Latanya's voice was brought to the discussion as well, even though she couldn't make it in person. But such an important topic, and it really had me thinking. And I watched the women around the room and saw how their heads were nodding and they were taking notes. And so I know that it resonated.
And I do want to mention that because of this storm, while we were in a cone of silence in the room, it was just, those in the room, we do have permission from myself and the other panelists to publish some materials from that, and they will be published through CCBJ. So that discussion, we're in the process of writing an article or possibly even two. And so keep an eye on the Corporate Counsel Business Journal listeners, because there will be more on this.
Great. Well, thank you to our listeners. I am sure that this conversation will continue because it is part of our day-to-day lives and it's not going away anytime soon. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review for us and consider sharing your favorite episodes with a friend or colleague. Please continue to send us your ideas at podcast@onrecordpr.com, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, Gina.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.